All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us right now. It is about that time, so we're going to jump right in and start the webinar on the educational series on long-term care planning and insurance. My name is Michael Fitzpatrick, and I've been specializing in long-term care planning and insurance since 2001. I helped co-found the LTC partnership. I've personally helped over 1,000 families create a plan to deal with this aging issue. I've went out and earned the CLTC designation years ago called Certified in Long-Term Care. I sit as an advisory board member on the American Association for Long-Term Care Insurance, AALTCI. I'm a frequent speaker, a writer, a coach for people within the industry. And the last bullet point here is really my favorite, but I genuinely just love helping people through empowering them with education. So with that being said, the webinar today is broken down into 5 very simple sections. And we're going to talk about longevity. We're going to talk about what long-term care is versus what you might think it is. We're going to then talk about what options you have as a consumer. And then we'll jump right into showing you how to customize a plan, for different circumstances. And then give you an idea of what some of the sample costs are for this type of protection. So let's just talk and start off with the issue of demographic trends and the topic of longevity. Now, you probably don't need me to tell you that people are living longer today than ever before. In fact, everywhere that we look, the front pages of magazines, on the news, etc., we see something relative to the topic of aging. And the reason for it is that the boomers were born between 1946 and 1964, and there was almost 80 million of them that were born during that period of time. That's probably also not news to you, but what is pretty interesting is when you liken it to a basketball moving through a garden hose. We look at the boomers kind of like the pig and the python, and if you think back to the 1950s, there was this tiny little company that nobody had ever heard of before called Gerber, and all of a sudden they sold 1.6 billion jars of baby food over about a 10 or 15 year span. Then all of a sudden, Kinney Shoes and Hush Puppies had a genius idea where there's 80 million little feet running around. Why don't we specialize in children's shoes? And then the ball kept traveling through. In the 50s, you had companies like Mattel and Hasbro with games like Candyland and Monopoly and all these games for these boomers to play with. Then the basketball kept traveling, and you had McDonald's and Dairy Queen and KFC. And then, interestingly enough, in the 60s, whoever was born on January 1st, 1946, the first wave of the boomers, all of a sudden, 16 and 17 years later, started getting their driver's license. So all of a sudden, again, the automotive industry experienced huge growth for almost 2 decades because there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15,000 kids turning 16 or 17 every day for almost 18 years. Then all those boomers moved home, and the parents kept saying, if you live under our roof, you have to abide by our rules. And the boomers said, you know what? I want to move out, and I want to pursue the American dream and become a quote-unquote homeowner. And so people to this day are still talking about the real estate boom of the 1970s and 80s. And when you think about the basketball now being all the way over to the other side of the garden hose, the 2 biggest issues that people have going into retirement planning or to retirement itself is number 1 is outliving their income, and number 2 is spending all their money on long-term care. So there's a lot of issues now that are much more relevant to the boomers, just like all the other items that we've seen on the screen were relevant during those times. And so as we move through this thing called life, we all start on the bottom left-hand side of this chart. It's a great chart from Lincoln Financial Group. But we come into this world and we're totally dependent in all of our area of life. Financially, spiritually, physically, mentally, and we need to be nurtured and groomed. And all of a sudden, we have this strong desire to attain independence. And then most people reach this level of independence. And once they've reached it, they have a desire to maintain it forever until they die. But sometimes, whether it's due to an accident or an injury or an age-related issue or something unforeseeable, we lose the ability to remain independent and we fall back into a dependency. Although, mentally, our desire to maintain dignity and choices and control, in other words, our independence, never goes away. So that's really where the conundrum's created. So long-term care is the subject of the day, primarily because people don't die anymore. And when I say that, we do know that people die, but we're not dying of the same types of illnesses or conditions that would have killed people in the quote unquote good old days. Think back for a second. Seriously, 50, 60, 70 years ago, I'm not too sure how good the good old days were, at least as it relates to medical care or health care. 50 years ago, if somebody had a heart attack or cancer or a stroke, generally what happened to those people? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but yeah, you probably said that they died. It's like you already know the answer. Well, we think about our chances of surviving those quote unquote death sentences today, and they're exponentially greater, largely due to medical advancements, technology, prescription drugs, health and wellness initiatives, tobacco crackdown. There's been a lot of focus, and it actually works. We're actually living a lot longer than ever before, which is great. But it also comes with it some consequences if we're not prepared. So, little quiz for everybody here. Any guesses? You can write down on a piece of paper if you'd like, but any guesses as to what the average life expectancy was back in 1935? It was actually 58 for men and 62 for females. Now, something else happened in 1935, and the government came out and they rolled out a program that provided people income forever and ever and ever until they died. And that program was called Social Security. Now, the irony is that when they first rolled that program out, you had to be 65 in order to collect your first paycheck. So the average male was already 7 years deceased, and the average female was already 3 years deceased before they got their quote-unquote first paycheck. So what that means is that people died before their 60s, and obviously people lived beyond their 60s, but on average, men lived to 58, women to 62. And when Social Security first came out, there was about 40 to 50 people contributing into that system, into that account, into that fund, into that program for every one person that was collecting on the back end. And boy, has that changed a lot over the recent years. So any guesses as to what the average life expectancy is for women today? The answer is actually 86 years young. And I say young because this is a picture of my roommate, Jay, in the yellow shirt. This is his grandmother, Flash, who was doing a headstand at our college graduation at Fairfield University. And Jay had been telling us for years about this vibrant grandmother that he has who does these headstands and so on, and nobody believed him. And so when Flash came to school, we just laid down a towel and we kind of put her to the test, and she, pun intended, she rose to the occasion. And all of a sudden, this is, I think, the vibrancy, how seniors see themselves today. So Flash still is not old, and she's in her mid to late 90s. And how about the average life expectancy of men today? Any guesses? What if I told you it was 39? You probably don't think that that's possible, and you're right. So I'm just kidding. It's about 82 years old. You have to have a little bit of levity with the topic of long-term care. So men don't live quite as long as females, but they're now all living into their 80s. And what I tell a lot of people, is that when Albert Einstein had a quote, he wasn't talking really about our present day, although what he was saying was that it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And a lot of that's kind of coming true nowadays. And when long-term care comes up as a topic, I believe that it has more to do with your perspective than anything else. And one of my favorite artists, Norman Rockwell, has a painting called The Triple Self-Portrait. And he's about 70-something years old while he's doing the painting, but he's putting himself on the canvas as if he's in his 40s or early 50s all over again, in the height of his career. And so when I talk to people about long-term care, there's really two different groups of folks. You have some people who are looking for all the reasons that why not having a plan is going to be right for them. They're going to say things like, I'll kill myself, my kids will take care of me, I'll visit Dr. Kevorkian, put a towel over my head, my wife will take care of me, I really don't care, and I hate insurance companies, I hate premiums, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not saying it's a right or a wrong, but that's just one perspective about this topic of planning and being proactive. Now, another group of folks that I've met in the last 15 years when I travel around the country and talk about this topic, they say things like, I really want to protect and preserve the things that I've worked so hard for all my life. And I really don't want to be a burden to people that I love. If they want to help take care of me, that's okay, but I don't want it to be in a burdensome way. And quite frankly, I want to have some choices, and I want to have some dignity and some control of where my care is provided, who provides it, and you know what? If there's a small price I have to pay each month or each year in a premium to have that peace of mind, then it is what it is. That's what insurance is for. So I can't tell you which group you should belong to. That's not my job. But there are two different groups and two different perspectives. And in order for my education, for my information to really be of value and to help you, I would just encourage you to be open-minded towards having this conversation, because I know it can be a very unpleasant topic that people would rather put off till tomorrow. Well, tomorrow does come a lot, and oftentimes you're in crisis mode, which means that options start to go away. So here's an interesting 4 bullet point fact sheet about long-term care. And this is a very important starting point because it starts to help dispel some of the myths and misconceptions about long-term care. So for example, right now there's about 15 million people who are currently receiving long-term care services, and it's rapidly growing obviously as the boomers are aging. Now, 82% of those who are cared for either at the home or in assisted living. So one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is they think that long-term care or insurance is for nursing homes, when the reality is that most care takes place in the place that you probably prefer as well, which is in the home setting. Only 18% of long-term care takes place in a nursing home. Now, the second biggest misconception that people have is they think that long-term care is for old people. But the interesting part is that 40%, almost half of the people who need care right now in our country, are actually working age adults between the ages of 18 and 64. So you think of Christopher Reeve or Michael J. Fox or Montel Williams or probably somebody else that you know in your town or in your community who's had some sort of a health issue under the age of 65. And so it happens to a lot of people, young and old. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter has a great quote, and she says there's 4 kinds of people in the world. There's those that have been caregivers, there's those that are currently caregivers, there's those who will be caregivers, and there's those of us that will need caregivers. So what we're dealing with right now is kind of a double-edged sword, because there's 2 different groups that we're trying to assist presently, and it's hard to know which group should get all the resources and attention and focus. So you have those that are currently in crisis mode, people and families that are going through this issue right now, as we speak. Then we also have the 78 to 80 million baby boomers that are coming up, right behind them. So when you think about it from a visual perspective, the current problem that we're witnessing is all the people that are benefiting from this increased longevity. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, but we can't even handle the tip of the iceberg. It's literally bankrupting parts of the federal government's programs through Medicaid, for example, Medicare, Social Security, unfunded liabilities. The states are having a very difficult time handling it, and families all of a sudden are having 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000 a year, dissipate out of their estate or their resources. So what we're witnessing so far is just the tip of the iceberg, but the real problem is what's on its way in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so, people who are in crisis mode on the left-hand side here, they're trying to plan when there's no time to plan. And I want you to think about yourself for 1 second, and you're that little stick figure in the middle there. If something were to happen to you, who are the 3 to 5 people that would hopefully come to your rescue or come to your aid? Because those are the people that you would be doing planning for, to give them the resources and the infrastructure in place, to help take care of you longer, better, and healthier. So people who are in crisis mode don't typically have the best options available, nor do they make the best options because there's a lot of pressure involved. And the boomers are trying to be more proactive. On the right-hand side here, they're very uncertain about Social Security. Most of them don't have a pension plan from their employer anymore. They potentially have to have enough money to last for a 30-year long retirement, 20 to 40 years for some people, and they need sufficient income. And on top of that, a lot of them are becoming 15 to 20 hour per week uncompensated caregivers for a loved one. So again, there's so many different issues and challenges that are present within a family, within an employer, within a company, and our job is to help provide people with the right education, to make good decisions. So What is long-term care? Well, by definition, it's very simple. It's assistance, help, that's provided to someone who has a condition or an illness or some sort of a cognitive impairment that limits their ability to perform normal day-to-day activities of daily living. So basically, it's helping somebody because something's happened to them and they really can't take care of themselves any longer. So when we think about the activities of daily living, there are 6 things that we do each and every day that enables us to be considered independent. We bathe, we eat, we get dressed, we toilet, we transfer, which means moving from spot to spot, and we maintain our continence. And when we lose the ability to provide or to do 2 out of these 6 activities of daily living, we now need long-term care. Okay, in a separate category by itself is if somebody has a cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, things of that nature. And we've seen, 4 people that have reached the real limelight in the media in the last 15 or 20 years. Katharine Hepburn, Ronald Reagan, Michael J. Fox, Pope John Paul II. So either situation, physically or cognitively, your doctor has to certify that you will require care and support and assistance for a minimum of 90 days in order for it to be considered long-term care, long-term custodial care. If you broke both your arms, for example, and you couldn't do 4 or 5 of those activities of daily living, your doctor would say you'll be back in good health in probably, 8 weeks. So that was really never long-term care. And when you actually look at the different levels of care that somebody who requires long-term care needs, you'll see there's 3 different types, okay? But it's very disproportionate in terms of the day in and day out needs. So for example, the little yellow sliver here is skilled care. Skilled care is like open heart surgery, bone marrow transplants, hip replacements. That's done by a doctor, typically in a hospital setting. So is it part of long-term care? Absolutely. Is it a big part of the day in and day out needs that people have? Not really. Only about half of 1% of the needs are in that category. Intermediate care is physical therapy, rehab. Again, is it part of long-term care? Absolutely. Is it a big part? As you can see here on the screen, not so much. So what is this blue thing? Long-term care, in essence, really is custodial care. Well, custodial care is very simply helping people with those 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living, or supervising somebody with some sort of a cognitive impairment, as we just talked about. So really, long-term care is custodial care. And if you looked at your traditional health insurance, if you're working right now, and if you were to find that booklet and dust it off maybe and read through it, what you'll notice is that skilled care, you're covered for up to the first 100 days. After that, you're on your own. Intermediate care, you're covered for generally 45 to 60 days, per occurrence per year. And then after that, you're on your own. And then for custodial care, it's just not a covered service. Health insurance was never designed to cover the issue of longevity. It was designed to help you with hospitalizations, procedures, doctor's visits, and things of that nature. So now if you were to go look at Medicare, because Medicare, if you've ever confused Medicare and Medicaid, hopefully by the end of this little webinar, you'll never confuse them again. But if you were to write down the word Medicare and underline the last 4 letters, it obviously spells care. So it's medical care for people who are 65 years of age and beyond. But Medicare does not pay for custodial care, which is what long-term care is. It'll do a great job with your doctor's visits and some hospital visits. You can pick up a Medicare supplement plan, and they'll pick up some co-insurances and deductibles. But everybody gets those Social Security statements sent to their mail 3 months before their birthday every year. And on the back, page 6 in the top left-hand paragraph, it just says right there, blatantly in the top paragraph, Medicare does not pay for long-term care, so you might want to consider options for private insurance. So maybe people have read that, maybe they haven't. Most people I've spoken to never made it to page 6. So I want to point out there that health insurance and Medicare, they really don't even fall into the options category when we talk about the options that people have. So one of the things that people like to ask is, how long does somebody require long-term care for? Well, that's a great question. And if you were to look at a claim, and a claim means how long the person needed care from the beginning till when they didn't need care anymore. So maybe they needed care at home for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Then maybe they went to assisted living for 6 months or a year or year and a half, and ultimately made it to a nursing home. But again, most people don't make it to a nursing home. So if you were to look at the claim, how long somebody requires long-term care for from the beginning to the end, it's about 5.5 years for women and a little over 4 years for men. Now, some of these costs that are here, it depends on which area of the country you live in. But just to give you an example, and there's some great websites that I can provide to you where you can click on a map and click on a state and click on a county and see what the average costs of care are for home care or assisted living or nursing homes and so on. So home care right now costs about $20 per hour. So even somebody coming in for a half a day runs about $87,000 a year. To the other extreme on the nursing home side, I've actually seen it up to $300, $310, $320 per day. That runs about $80 to $100,000 a year, and then everything in between. Assisted living facilities, adult daycare. Adult daycare might just be where you drop them off for a couple hours a day and then pick them back up. Maybe it's $55 for a couple hours, and they go and they hang out with a group of people. But the real issue and the concern I've heard from a lot of people just like you is that they understand also that the costs have been increasing by 3, 4, 5, 6%, depending on the year, over the last 30 years. So one of the silent killers is this thing called inflation, and I want to put it in perspective for you. Now, let's just say that something were to happen to you today, and you needed $200 a day for 4 years. Somehow you have to figure out where $292,000 is going to come from. Is it going to come from your 401k, your IRA, your bank account, your savings account, your house? Where is that money going to be coming from? Mutual funds, stock accounts? So let's just say that you say, you know what, I'm young. It's not going to happen now. And maybe it won't happen until 15 years from now. Say, all right, well, you know what? That same care is going to cost closer to $400 a day. So for 4 years worth of long-term care, you're talking at close to almost $600,000 out of pocket. And the question again becomes, where's that money going to come from? Which account is it going to be drawn from? And you say, well, you know what? 15 years from now is still pretty early on. I'll still be pretty young. And maybe it's going to be 25 or 30 years from now. And I say, well, you know what? That cost of care is going to be closer to $800 a day. Now, I know that these numbers, when you look at things with inflation down the road, they can seem ridiculous. They can seem outlandish. But if you were to talk to your grandparents or your great-grandparents and tell them that private education right now costs $50,000 to $60,000 per year for a student, or that postage costs a half a dollar, to mail a letter, nobody would believe those things, 50, 60 years ago. So even 20 years ago, that's really what inflation is. So we want to make sure people are not only prepared, God forbid something were to happen today, but they're also prepared, down the road. So you're probably asking yourself at this point, what options do I have? I mean, I get the problem. I understand this. Aging is naturally all around us right now. So what am I to do? Well, you've got 4 options to consider. The first one is to self-insure. It's to use your own personal savings and assets. Option 2 is your family and your friends, to use people instead of money. Option 3 is Medicaid, to use the welfare healthcare program where it's asset tested, and if you've depleted your resources, you then qualify for Medicaid. And option 4 is transferring the risk with some form of insurance and offloading it to somebody else. So I'm going to walk you through an interesting exercise right now that I think that you'll get some value out of. Everybody I talk to personally has different levels of assets, different home values, different investment accounts, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, annuities, 401k, IRA, savings accounts. So all of that is different, per couple, per individual, per household. What's the same, though, are 4 risks that you and I face together, okay? Now, these numbers that just popped up here on the screen represent the odds, the likelihood that you'll lose $100,000 or more to each of these risks. So you might say, whoa, there's a 1 in 3,000 chance of this happening over to this risk, and down below there's a 1 in 2 chance of it happening. Geez, that's very likely to occur. So if I were to say, all right, well, each of these are different insurances that we have. For example, if a fire were to happen to our house, naturally we're not going to have to dip into our retirement savings to replenish or repair that. Why? Because we have that protected and walled off with some form of fire insurance or homeowners insurance. Yet, did you know that only 1 in 3,000 homes incurred damage in excess of $100,000 due to a fire? And we have that protected. Wouldn't even think twice about it. Now, an automobile accident, 1 in 240 automobile accidents result in damage and or liability in excess of $100,000. And yet, by law, it's mandatory that you have that risk protected and walled off with auto insurance. Now, 1 in 50 people will require some form of a hospital stay or a procedure. And so we have health insurance, we have Medicare, things of that nature to wall off that risk. Now, isn't it interesting that of all of the things that's most likely to happen, long-term care is going to happen to 1 out of 2 people? And so what happens is that everything falls through the cracks. And we're just saying, why don't we keep everything intact? And if we can figure out a way where it's not going to change your lifestyle to have this protection, that we can round that out and have all of your assets protected. Because you've done a great job with 3 of the walls, but why would we leave the 4th wall opened? So option 1, using your own assets and resources, if I could show you a way that you could actually get this protection in place, in force, as part of your overall plan, and it's not going to change your lifestyle whatsoever, is that something that you'd be interested in learning more about? I'm sure the answer would be probably, yes. So the second option that people have to consider is family and friends, and that's really where they utilize people that they know: sons, daughters, spouses, neighbors, people in their church or synagogue, cousins. And the question becomes is, do they even live close to you geographically? Things have changed a lot. A lot of the women are back in the workforce right now. Most people have an inadequacy in terms of experience to providing proper care. There's a lot of physical and emotional demands that take place with a caregiver. And there's a personal dignity issue as well. So I tell anybody I talk to that long-term care planning and insurance is not designed to replace people from doing what they want to do to help, because you really couldn't stop them from helping if they wanted to. But it does give them the proper infrastructure and support so they can provide care to you longer, healthier, and better. They can go to their kids' recital if they have to. They can get a 6-hour night's sleep. They can go back to work if they need to. So long-term care planning does not replace family. It just helps them do things for you longer, better, and healthier. Now, Medicaid, if you were to underline the last 3 letters of that word, it spells AID, which stands for All Investments Depleted. And it doesn't really stand for that, but we made it up to differentiate Medicare, medical care, versus Medicaid, AID, All Investments Depleted, because that one is means tested. They look at your income, your assets, your home value, and it really is health care that's designed to pay for people who are on welfare. And in the majority of areas, it only pays for care in a nursing home. So unless you really wanted to spend down all your assets and qualify for Medicaid, that might not be one of your best options. The 4th option is transferring the risk, to an insurance company. And that guarantees access to quality care for you. You can avoid indigency on qualifying for Medicaid. Obviously, maintaining your independence. It'll help protect your resources. It'll relieve any burden on your loved ones. Ensure a choice of your care. Who provides it, where it's provided, when it comes to you, how it comes, and really helps protect you and your spouse and your family's overall quality of life. So today, more than when I started 14 or 15 years ago, there are a lot of what's referred to as solutions now to address this problem. There's long-term care insurance. A lot of the insurance companies have developed life insurance policies with long-term care riders, or annuities with long-term care riders, or the concept of a reverse mortgage, and so on. So I'm going to walk you through really what to look for in a long-term care insurance company and how you customize a policy, because once you understand long-term care insurance, of all these options that are here, everything else is understandable too, because everything else is built off of the chassis of a long-term care insurance policy. So what to look for in a good insurance policy? How long has the company been in business? What's their claims paying experience like? Do they have solid ratings from the ratings company, Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch and so on? What has been their history of rate increases? Do they have enough, assets to surplus as their ratio, so they'll be there when you're most likely to need this, at claim time? And what you'll notice is that this is a small sampling of some of the carriers that we work with. So our company does not represent any one company in particular. We actually provide the general objectivity to a consumer. So we sit on the same side of the bench as you and help you assess what's available in the marketplace. And this is, again, a short list of some of the companies that are available. And then some of the life insurance companies that have the long-term care riders: Aviva, AXA, Genworth, Minnesota Life, Nationwide, Transamerica, and the list goes on. So we bring that level of objectivity and research to you as a consumer. So when you're designing a plan, what do you do? And this is where we're going to wrap up with this here. So there's really 4 core features that go into designing a plan. The last bullet point here is the riders, some bells and whistles. So the first one is, how much coverage, do you need to have? How much coverage do you want? And you can choose anywhere between $50 and $500 per day, which equates to $1,500 to $15,000 per month. So you might scratch your head and say, well, what's the average cost of care in my area? And somebody says, well, it's about $7,500 on average, or $6,000 on average. Say, well, I have my pension income, I have my investments, I have our house, I have Social Security, I have my working income, whatever it may be. If I was faced with a $6,000 bill, that would be pretty paralyzing. But if I had a policy to cover me for $4,000 or $5,000 a month, I think that would be great. It would really offset a lot of this risk and this burden. So you can do what's called partially self-insuring. Maybe you come out of pocket $500 or $1,000 a month or whatever at claim time, because your policy paid $5,000 and your care costs $6,000. But it's so much better than coming out of pocket $6,000. And so the first thing that will help you choose is how much coverage makes the most sense for your personal situation, given where you live and the resources that you have, and how much coverage ultimately gives you a sense of peace of mind. Number 2 is, how long does your policy last for? Not from when you buy it, but from when you actually need to use it. So you can buy a 2-year program, or 3 years, or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. A lot of companies have gotten away from these lifetime benefits, but again, the average claim is somewhere between 4 and 5 or 4 and 6 years, which is typically adequate in terms of coverage. So the benefit period, if you were 58 years old right now and you bought a 2-year benefit period, that doesn't mean when you're 60 that the plan's over. It means going forward, you'd have 2 years worth of benefit to draw from on your insurance policy. Now, to make it a little bit easier for you, actually what you're getting when you buy long-term care is you're buying this pool of money concept. And if you were to take $6,000 a month, for example, of benefit that you purchase through your long-term care insurance policy, and you could use that benefit monthly every month, which is 12 months a year, and say that you bought a 4-year benefit period. Obviously, that would create a pool of money of $288,000. Now, if you didn't use the full $6,000 that you had available every month, you can actually have your pool continue and last longer than 4 years. So, and again, if you bought $7,500 a month and you bought 5 years of coverage, the pool is bigger. So that's really what you're getting, is you're getting this pool of money concept. The third option is what's referred to as the elimination period. And the elimination period is a fancy word for a deductible. How many days you pay first before the insurance kicks in. So is it no days? Is it 20 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And we help you design that so that it really coincides with other resources that you have. So 90 days for a facility might be a great deductible because Medicare pays the first 100 days, and maybe having no deductible for home care is probably a good feature to consider. So we really help you figure out which deductible, which elimination period makes the most sense. Then the last part here is, how do you protect against the rising costs of inflation? We all know, as we talked about before, that the costs of care are going to continue to go up and up and up and up. But there are people buying this insurance, remember, from people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. So I think you'd have to agree that inflation is going to impact those different groups in different ways, right? For example, the 40-year-old might be more concerned with the notion or the concept of inflation than an 82-year-old, just because they have this mentality that they'll be around hopefully for the next 40, 30, 40, 50 years. And so the inflation option that makes sense for your policy, for your program, is again going to be customized. Do you want to have no inflation? Well, that probably might not be a great recommendation unless you're a little bit older. Do you want to have GPO, guaranteed purchase option, to buy more coverage every 3 years, for example, or FPO, future purchase option? Do you want to have simple inflation built into your policy or compound inflation built into your policy? We'll help you make those decisions and get an idea of what the costs are. And then, just for lack of time for this particular webinar, is some extra little bells and whistles. And these are things you can consider, adding to your policy. Some of them are fantastic and I recommend all the time. Some of them aren't relevant. Survivorship and shared care is irrelevant if you're single. So we help you understand some of these little bells and whistles as well. And the process, in terms of getting this kind of coverage, or getting the process started, is that whichever carrier would make the most sense, we would actually go through a software program, put your name in it, put your age, and run a bunch of different companies side by side and see what the different costs, would be for you and for your situation. And then once we figured out which company seems to be right, then any of them require an application. We fill that out, they answer some medical questions. The application then goes into underwriting. Okay, underwriting is where the insurance company is now evaluating you as an applicant, and you're still thinking about it yourself. And so they'll get copies of medical records from your doctor. They'll do a telephone interview with you to make sure that you're cognitively okay. Maybe they'll do a face-to-face interview with you if you're over 72 years old, for example. And so they go through this evaluation process. Then they come back and they issue a policy. They issue the contract. And then I get the contract back to my customer, to my client. And at that point, they have a 30-day free look period to make any modifications or changes or even to cancel it, altogether. So they have to be insurable. You have to be able to get this coverage. So you have to have decent enough health to qualify. And there's a great old wise Chinese proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So I don't know if this is the right coverage for you. I'm not sure if it's affordable or if you would even qualify health-wise, but my job in this webinar is to provide you with enough education to get started. And if you're interested in learning more, you can obviously feel free to email me. You can get the information on my website. My phone number is down below here. You can go to the web link and let me know. You can book an appointment. You can book a complimentary 5-minute consultation. I even do 60-minute private consultations for free, no charge, to just go through the different carriers and pull up your name in the software program as well. So hopefully this webinar was of interest to you. Hopefully it answered a lot of the questions that you had. Hopefully it gave you the resource and the education that you're looking for as you're attempting to become a more informed consumer and a more educated consumer. So thank you so much for spending your time with me during this webinar, and I look forward to helping you in any capacity I can going forward. Take care. Bye-bye.